Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now nearing the end of our second season, and we're still just excited as ever to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung, and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's show on how our transportation affects climate change. We'll also delve a little bit into the recently released United Nations Committee report on climate change. Now, the U.S. transportation sector is responsible for about one-third of our country's climate-damaging emissions. In California alone, transportation is the leading source of greenhouse gas pollution, accounting for about 40% of the state of California's emissions. And how we can collectively reconcile a need to reduce carbon pollution with all of our own widespread fondness for driving, often with just one driver, no passengers, even in congested urban areas, is a constant issue and dilemma. But cars aren't the only vehicles that pollute. Airplanes, ships, and trains produce a large portion of our world's greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's a supply chain. That chain gets us all of the daily stuff that we use. The supply chain has made the world a much smaller place. Low-cost manufacturing locations on the other side of the world used to feel like they were far, far away. But today, you find yourself on the other side of the world in just a click of the mouse, or at the very least, in about a day's travel if you're actually going to go there. But this global shrinkage comes at a cost, a big one. For that low-cost inventory item that we all use to arrive at the warehouse, and we're talking about things like your new electric toothbrush or your Ring doorbell or your motion detector lights or the kid's latest toy, all of those, after traveling half around the globe, it then will likely be transported by a truck to get it from a factory to a forwarding or staging location, then another truck to get it from that forwarding location to a shipping destination, then a forklift or a crane to get it from the shipping destination onto another mode of transport, which might be an airplane or a cargo ship. And then there comes another forklift or train and more trucks, at least two of them, to get it to your local area or regional warehouse. And then probably another forklift within your warehouse to get it onto that truck that's going to finally deliver it to your door. So now, while all of this can happen relatively quickly, that process can burn up a lot of fossil fuel. And while products have always needed to be transported from their manufacturing locations to their customers, the sheer volume of global manufacturing and global demand and the greater distances they have to travel has been amplified and has significantly amplified the impact to the environment. Again, nearly 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States come from transportation. And as this supply chain we just described grows deeper into our consumer neighborhoods, and as issues like the COVID pandemic exacerbate the supply chain and the demand as well, the pollution creep associated with all of that grows as well. This is a lot. And here today to help us understand this some more is John Baily. John is with the National Resources Defense Council, and he is headquartered in San Antonio. The National Resources Defense Council is one of the foremost international environmental advocacy groups in the world, and they work to safeguard Earth, its people, its plants and animals, and the natural systems on which all life depends. i.e., the Natural Resources Defense Council. And they do this through use of data and science to unearth the root causes of the problems that confront us. And then they use that information to create transformative solutions and then mobilize the support of partners, members, and activists to advocate for laws and policies that will help protect our environment for now as well as in the future. And John is currently the climate advisor for the city of San Antonio through the Bloomberg Philanthropies American Cities Climate Challenge, which is a major project of the Natural Resources Defense Council. John leads their efforts to build community and political support for active transportation, public transit funding, and vehicle electrification. As well, John has over 2 decades of experience as an advocate for sustainable and equitable communities at the national, state, and local levels. Thank you for joining us, John. John, I want to start off by you helping our audience to understand exactly how does transportation affect climate change? Can you connect the dots for people as it relates to the various modes of transportation that we all use and that we all rely upon in some kind of way, and how each of these modes impacts or drives climate change?
Sure. I found the most useful way to think about, you think about that transportation sector you mentioned, that's about, a third, usually about 30 to 40% of emissions, depending on the state, depending on the city. Think of it as a 3-legged stool. On the one hand, you have the vehicle efficiency. So how, what's the fuel economy of that particular vehicle? Secondly, the second leg, you have the carbon content of the fuel itself. So you think of ways that you can make fuel sort of less polluting, whether it's through biofuels or other kind of, or if it's electric vehicles, making sure the fuel going into the power plant is more efficient as well. So those are the 2 legs. Actually, what I spend most of my time on is that third leg, which I always feel is kind of ignored a little bit, and that's just the amount we're all driving. That's what planners call VMT, which just means vehicle miles traveled, which is all of the driving that we're doing. And the pickle is, even if we hit real home runs on the fuel efficiency and the carbon content, if we're still driving ever more and more, it really kind of counteracts those effects. So really, the fuel efficiency of the vehicle, how much carbon is in the fuel itself, and finally the amount we're all driving. And all of that together makes up that transportation sector you talked about.
So would you say that the car driving that we do is the biggest culprit or the greatest culprit? Put those in perspective. Sure.
Yeah, I think that, so the way they talk about sort of light-duty vehicles, those are the cars and trucks that we drive, and those are the biggest source of the emissions, more than sort of heavy trucks and even even airplanes and such. So that is for sure, but I want to be really clear, that is not the fault of the people driving the cars. It's the only way, in most places, we've done a really successful job of planning and engineering our way into no choices at all. So the only choice we have, with the exception of some places, is to drive everywhere to do everything. And worldwide, over 10 million people are dying from air pollution, which isn't talked about as much. And I think also, to be clear, that's not just we say people are dying. Overwhelmingly, that's low income, people of color, and in the world, the so-called developing countries where those harms are felt more acutely.
Indeed. And last week, when we had our primer on air quality, I found out plants are dying.
For sure, 100%. That's a whole other thing, for sure. Absolutely.
Animals are dying. And
Yes.
people don't tend to realize the broad ripple effect impact of all of this.
Yeah.
Okay. But I want to connect that dot to poor air quality caused by the fossil fuels or the gasoline, creating air pollution. And then I want to have people understand how then that's causing climate change or global warming.
Sure. So we're driving. Fumes coming out of the car is carbon. And when that happens, that means that the earth gets hotter. So that's not only does the earth get hotter, but the fumes coming out of the car are very harmful to people and human beings. So that stuff coming out of our car hurts us when we breathe, and it hurts the earth because it makes the earth much hotter, which is helping to cause the wildfires, the hurricanes, the other natural disasters, and the rise of the sea levels. So there's this a direct, when we burn fossil fuels, we make the earth get hotter. We also make the air we breathe less clean.
Indeed. And, we here in North Texas, I don't know if y'all have that problem down in southern part of San Antonio, have a real issue with the ozone. And in fact, North Texas has been under a clean air non-attainment status for 15 years and counting.
As is San Antonio. We are what's called yet non-attainment, which means our air is not clean. And it's because overwhelmingly the amount we're driving.
We're going to go ahead and go to break right now, but we'll be back on the other side with a lot more time for John to continue this very interesting conversation about how our transportation affects climate change. We've been with John Baily from the National Resources Defense Council, and we'll be right back on the other side. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Market, Sunflower Shops, and many other locations, as well as available free for download online at NADallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. Our other sponsor is Marshall Green Garden Center, Nature's Merchant since 1946, providing organic gardening expertise and supplies and plants for our North Texas climate, including landscaping design and installation. Check out their events and weekly promos at marshallgrain.com. And our other sponsor is Profound Foods. It is the marketplace for real local food in North Texas. They deliver local organic food to your door each week. Free home delivery in 33 North Texas zip codes. Their deliveries include fresh produce as well as chef-created goods from Profound's commercial kitchen. With over 50 local farmer producers, Profound Foods is building a more connected, resilient food system in North Texas. Check them out at profoundfoods.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on how our transportation affects climate change. And we are back with John Baily with us from San Antonio with the National Resources Defense Council, which is an international environmental advocacy group. Again, thank you so much, John, for taking time to be with us today. And thank you for helping us right before the break connect the dots of how we get from transportation to air pollution to climate change. So what would you say is perhaps the number two issue or the number two transportation contributor to climate change?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. Certainly shipping and air travel are and heavy-duty trucks as well. I was talking a lot about cars and trucks, but there's the semis and all those, and those are a real pickle because I think the batteries that are really helping to revolutionize electric vehicles, like cars that we use, the batteries for those. Batteries for semis and planes and shipping are just not practical right now, probably, with the exception of some outliers. So kind of figuring that pickle out will be a challenge. But the revolution in battery storage has really allowed for the extraordinary growth of electric vehicles for cars. But it's the heavy trucks, the shipping, and the air travel that's a challenge.
Indeed, and I guess some of that seems, in my little mind, points to the space that those things occupy as well.
The weight and the space.
The weight, the space, and the infrastructure.
Yes, right.
As well. Look at the infrastructure a port takes up.
Now, I will say on an optimistic note, and I should just clarify that starting to know a little bit less about the trucks and the shipping than I do about the cars and the transit. But what I can share is that optimistically, in places like that, there is usually less owners of the stuff that could mandate that. Like you mentioned, ports. I mean, there are port authorities that are often under public ownership, and so they have much more regulatory authority than the millions of us driving our own cars. Companies like DHL and FedEx, there's a smaller amount of companies that are running all those trucks. So if you can turn those trucks, like Amazon has already made some commitments for their trucks for the electric, if you can pull the levers of those companies, there's real opportunity there. Probably more than with cars because there's just fewer people to convince to do it.
So, John, though, starting back in the horse and buggy days, all we had to contend with back then in terms of transportation was horse and donkey manure. And and I don't know if back in those days they that's what I said. I know we now know it's fertilizer. I don't know if they used it for fertilizer back then or not. So how did we get to this place today where it's just so many assaults from the transportation sector?
Yeah, I think like everything, as everybody here knows, I mean, there was just enormous technological innovations over the last 100 years that just revolutionized every aspect of our lives. And probably, maybe with the exception of public health, few as dramatically as transportation in terms of our ability to get from A to B quickly that we can. So I think that's how it happened. I think that how we lived before was just a function of the transportation we had. It's not because people loved necessarily the horse and the buggy. It's because that was the only gig in town. So once you had opportunity to do other things, people took advantage of those. Unfortunately, kind of what we did, this is true of a lot of issues in the last 100 years, is we didn't either have enough information or we didn't care about the consequences of those decisions. And so that was a real challenge, is that while the car has provided tremendous benefits, or even fossil fuel transportation in general, tremendous benefits for people, like everything, there are downsides to it, especially downsides when you put kind of all your, you bet everything on that one thing. We've kind of put all of our investments and all of our policies, for the most part, just into driving fast to places. And when you do that, you leave everything else kind of behind. So it's not that we shouldn't have the great things that come with that. We should just have other choices as well, whether it's maybe not the horse and the buggy, but maybe so, I don't know. But the transit, the walking, the biking, wheelchair accessibility, et cetera. So we're making sure that we have ways to drive, ways to take the bus, and ways to walk and bike.
But speaking of that, on a global basis, we do have some good points of comparison.
Absolutely.
Because you have a number of cities, a number of places, especially in the older European cities, where they are so compact, they just don't have the wherewithal for all the sprawl and the driving that we have. In many cases, that is the quickest mode of transportation, is mass transportation. Mm-hmm. How does that stack up in terms of energy usage, fossil fuel exposure, and air pollution when you compare it to maybe some regions or countries or places where their predominant mode is mass transportation?
There's no doubt, and there's a great report called Growing Cooler and a follow-up report called Growing Wealthier by the Urban Land Institute, interestingly enough, an organization of real estate developers, that talked about when we are investing in safer choices, like transit, like walking and biking, and we have land uses, which is just the way our building forms, et cetera, that encourage that walking and encourage that transit, we reduce pollution and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Oh, I use the emissions word again, the pollution from our driving. So that's really important, because again, we focus on the newer technologies, which are hugely important, but it's really just our urban form, kind of how and where we grow, that's as important, if not more important than that. And again, importantly, people love that stuff. People oftentimes, not everyone, but many people want to live more like that. Again, not the horse and buggy, but the ability to walk to get a quart of milk. In most of America, you can't walk to get a quart of milk. Or if you do, it's extremely dangerous to do that. And in many places, we've even made it illegal to do it because you can't put up a corner store in a neighborhood. So we've really made it very difficult to do these basic everyday things we've done for a long time that, one, people want to do, and for our purposes today, help reduce pollution because you're not driving to do everything.
Well, I don't know a lot about it, and you can tell us a little bit more about the American Cities Project, but it seems to me that has to be some things that you all are looking at in that project, which is why Bloomberg Philanthropies is investing in it. It goes back to what you mentioned, is the decisions that are made. While nobody's going to get all of us, me number one, out of our cars, it does seem to me that there are some decisions that can be made.
You hit the nail on the head right there. I think so. The goal of my program, the American Cities Climate Challenge, is what Bloomberg Philanthropies realized 3 years ago when the United States pulled out of the Paris Accord, which was the international accord around climate change, is, okay, the federal government is MIA right now, but cities are where the action is. So how can we invest in cities that are trying to make these decisions around buildings and energy and transportation to get those policies happening? And so a lot of our work is making sure, and these are small things but important, the city's own cars are electric. So we're making our first investments in San Antonio, just like Dallas has done, Houston has done, and Austin has done, to make sure that the cars the cities are using are more electric than before. Making sure there are more publicly accessible charging stations. Because the challenge we have, especially in San Antonio, is, electric vehicle only makes sense often if you have a garage to plug it into. We have a high degree of renters in San Antonio that even if they want an electric vehicle, there's nowhere to charge it. So making sure we have those publicly accessible stations to do that. And finally, counties, cities, and regions spend millions, if not billions of dollars a year on transportation projects. And making sure that we're investing some of that money is going towards bus lanes. The problem with buses often is that they're stuck with the other cars. Well, what a lot of cities are doing all over America is making sure that lane is just for buses, makes it go faster, making sure the streets that we're building are accessible to people with disabilities, have wide sidewalks, have protected bikeways. So that money we're spending, we got lots of money. Don't let someone tell you there's no money to do it. Lots of money to do it. But instead of just building wide highways out there in the middle of nowhere, making sure we're investing that in where places where people live. So it's easy to get around by the bus, by rail, by walking, by biking.
And it has to filter on down to even the local housing
100%.
and zoning issues, I would think.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, people would love to walk to the store, but the zoning laws do not allow the store. So, that's one of those
That's exactly. The corner store is illegal in lots of America.
And we only have a few more minutes to go with you, John, so I want to hit up on a couple of things.
Sure, please.
And where do these driverless cars and other technology solutions, where do they fit into the picture today?
When it comes to electrification, that's really where the money is. I'm a big believer in electrify everything, in transportation hugely. Every year, they're getting cheaper. Every year, the batteries are lasting longer. The driverless, I'll be frank and honest with you, I'm not so bullish on it. I think in some situations, maybe like in suburban campuses, I could see it. But I get nervous when I see some of the pictures of how this would work in cities, and you have big fences up on the sidewalks, so all those rascally old people and kids don't end up on the street. That's not the city I want. I mean, I think cities are places where streets are for people. And so I got to really be convinced on driverless. There's smart people that know more about it than I do, but let's try it out in maybe controlled environments like airports, like suburban campuses, before we kind of bring that technology into the city. So we can really prove that it will. We want to make sure it works for people, not just making sure it's working for investors. And right now, I think it's maybe working more for investors starting companies, not the humans kind of living in cities.
Indeed, but I am heartened that at least there's a start. Last word, John, we've got about 1 minute for you, and that is to talk to us about what ordinary people can do in their everyday lives to help drive solutions to our transportation issues that are driving climate change.
I think the most important thing people can do, honestly, is to vote, and to vote for candidates and people that think it's important to make climate change one of the most important priorities for them, and make sure that those priorities include investing in safer transportation choices for more people. That's true at the state level, and that's true at the city level. And you said it great, Bernice, even at the local zoning level, making sure that the kind of housing we're approving, the kind of development we're approving, both works for all people at all income levels, and also makes it easier and safer for people to walk to do things. It is absurd that, to use our example we've talked about, the corner stores are legal. People should be able to walk to get a quart of milk.
Thank you so much, John. We really appreciate you helping us to understand this and, again, connect the dots on a very common everyday problem that people just need to become more aware of. We have been with John Baily from the National Resources Defense Council, and he's making us smarter about how our transportation affects climate change. Thank you, John. And we'll be back on the other side. We want to talk a little bit more about an elephant that's been in the room this week, and that is the recent United Nations climate change report. Be right back. Thank you, John. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. To today's show on how our transportation affects climate change. And for this next segment, we're going to talk about, I like to call it the elephant in the room, not that it's really an elephant in the room, but we've been hearing about it all this last week, and that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, or the IPCC report that we've seen and we've heard about all over the news, local and national news this week. It is a big deal. As I said, it was released earlier this week, and it was based on more than 14,000 studies, and it's been approved by 195 global governments. The report basically and vividly and loudly confirms the panel's prior warnings and outlines the dire need for aggressive climate action now. The report also states that it's not too late to mitigate the worst impacts of the climate crisis with our current knowledge and solutions if we can accelerate them to scale. So we want to dig into this a little bit more at the ground level. And here to help us unpack this and understand it a little bit more is Dr. Aida Ramos. Aida is an associate professor of economics at the University of Dallas. She earned her PhD in economics at the University of Notre Dame. Her research interests are around economic thought, economic development, and public policy, and she has been a long-time local go-to person around economic impact and issues around climate change. Welcome, Aida. We really appreciate you being able to join us and help us unpack this a little bit at the last minute.
Hi, Bernice. It's great to be here and to get to be back in conversation with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Aida, we want to start out by you helping our audience understand somewhat what are the highlights of the report, especially as it relates to or affects the day-to-day lives of people, and what can we see and feel every day that's kind of all around us to help us realize that what the report says is true.
Well, that's a lot to unpack. I mean, you mentioned it being an elephant in the room in this report. It's almost like a literal elephant because it's 3,900 pages, more or less. So definitely there's a lot to go through in there. But I do also want to put it into context, which is, this isn't a report that just fell out of nowhere. As you mentioned, the IPCC, and I want to stress this because in a lot of news stories I've seen, people use the acronym, but they don't say what it is. You did, so kudos to you. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a subcommittee of the UN Environmental Committee, and they have produced I think this is their 9th report. So they've been tracking this issue for a long period of time. The IPCC was founded in the 1980s together with the UN Environmental Committee and the World Meteorological Association. So you have a lot of different scientific experts who have contributed to this. What they are trying to do is to make a report that will or that has made recommendations for policymakers around the world. So, the 195 member countries of the United Nations, also the same countries who signed on to the Paris Accords. So I did want to also put it into context with the 2015 Paris Accords, which, John just mentioned. And that was a fantastic segment, by the way. I was listening with a lot of I need to address some of those things too during John's segment. But in the 2015 Paris Accords, that was an agreement by 195 member nations to cooperate and take measures to prevent world temperatures increasing the absolute threshold we don't want to go beyond is 2 degrees Celsius, which would mean a rise of, I really have to think about, it's the Fahrenheit of 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And the goal for the world's community that agreed to the Paris Accords, because, nations have come in and out, we came in and out in the United States, is to try to hit 1.5, and are no greater than 1.5. Of course, we'd like the increase to be less than 1.5 by the year 2100. So the dire finding from the IPCC report in the light of the 2015 Paris Accords goals is that they have found through the thousands of studies they have done and all the simulations they have run, and they have the best data available to them. About 200 scientists contributed to the writing of this particular report, is that we're already at 1.1. Since the end of the 19th century, we've already seen an increase of 1.1 degrees Celsius. So that's been about 2 degrees, which, so therefore the dire part of the report is that all of their models, 100% of them predict, because some of them predict it'll be even worse, but all of them predict we will all feel the impact of an increase of at least 1.5 degrees Celsius by the 2030s. So that's 70 years ahead of schedule of the goal of the Paris Accords that that was looking at 2100.
That's also 9 years from hence.
Exactly. So that is not too far away that we'll see this a very fast increase in temperatures, but that it is also getting very close to that upper limit, that was already set by the 2015 Paris Accords. So the urgency is there, but to address things locally. What have we already seen? I mean, the heat waves that we have seen this summer in the Pacific Northwest in particular, which, didn't just make things hotter, it also had an impact on an increase in wildfires. It had that horrible effect on, I don't know if all of you saw the news stories in July of all of those shellfish that had been boiled alive because the waters in the Pacific Northwest had never been that hot before. The wildfires right now in Greece, if you've seen the pictures on Instagram or on the news, on the conventional news, a lot of Europe is experiencing a heat wave right now as well. The extreme flooding that's occurred in the past few months in China. So we can just watch the news and watch stories that people are posting on social media from around the world to see that, and it's not to say that droughts and floods and fires have never happened before. It's just that they are becoming more extreme. And one of the things that the report makes very clear, or they reiterate, because we already knew this, is that with global warming, with an increase in greenhouse gas emissions, one of the major effects of it are extreme swings in our weather patterns.
Indeed. I was very heartened earlier this week on the news when almost most of the news stations were connecting the dot and making the point that the wildfires in California were caused by climate change. Mm-hmm. I was disappointed because they didn't connect the dots with the floods in China. The floods in China have been on the news, but they didn't go hard in connecting it with climate change as they did locally. I don't know why, but I think that's important too. When people are constantly hearing that, then it begins to sink in. So
I hope so. I mean, and it is true. Our media don't tend to connect things that are happening far away with things that are also happening here and seeing that they're all connected because we're in a global weather system. But we are also in a global economy that has contributed to these extreme weather events.
One last thing before we go, we just have 1 minute left with you, Aida, and that is what conclusions, though, can be drawn from the report as it relates to health and resource issues and perhaps some social issues?
Well, as far as health is concerned, I mean, another common Texas issue, I'm having it right now, it has to do with allergies. That, and John mentioned this, that with the situation with increased pollution that we have as a result of this, we do have more respiratory issues turning up in our health system. But just on a very basic level, we will have more pollen. We've already been having more pollen, but we will also see as more people move from places where there is no water or where sea levels are rising, we'll be moving into more crowded conditions where other difficulties arise from that, because then you do have more competition for resources in a very limited area. And that puts a strain on health systems, that puts a strain on transportation, housing, et cetera. So a lot of these, issues that seem out there, that they're in the climate somewhere, they do affect us in our day-to-day lives in cities, but
the climate refugees, people just see immigrants. And I've heard one expert say that probably about 30% of those immigrants are indeed climate refugees. Anyway, we are going to have to close out the segment now, but we look forward to having you back with us, Aida. You're such an expert and so knowledgeable on these issues, especially when we can wrap it and put it in terms of the economic impacts. So thank you so much for being with us. We've been with Dr. Aida Ramos with the University of Dallas. Thank you so much, and we will have you back again real soon.
Thank you for having me.
I want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. Our other sponsor is Marshall Grain Garden Center, nature's merchant since 1946, providing organic gardening expertise and supplies and plants for our Texas climate, as well as landscaping, design, and installation. Check them out and their events and weekly promos at marshallgrain.com. Our other sponsor is Profound Foods, the marketplace for real local food in North Texas. They deliver local organic food to your door each week in 33 North Texas zip codes. Their deliveries include fresh produce as well as chef-crafted goods from Profound's commercial kitchen, such as pasta sauces, jams, salads, and meal kits. With over 50 local farmer producers, Profound Foods is building a more connected, resilient food system in North Texas. Check them out at profoundfoods.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. To today's show on how our transportation affects climate change, as well as looking at the recently released United Nations Climate Change Report. And now, in our last segment, we have what for me is a very special treat. We're going to talk about climate change and skin health. We talked a lot about various environmental issues and its health impacts, but indeed, we've really not talked about impacts on skin health, and that's very important because that's the biggest organ of your body, they say. And as we've been talking about, the world's focus this week has been on climate change and how it has been accelerating and what it's doing to our environment, our health, and the quality of life on Earth as we know it. And as we talked about, we all know that climate change health effects are many and they're varied, with those most often discussed being chronic diseases such as lung health, respiratory diseases, and heart disease. And again, now we have an expert with us who has knowledge and has done research related to skin health. And again, for me, I've not been privileged to discuss this before, and I don't think that most ordinary folks in their everyday lives have really associated the impacts and the intersection with climate change. So here today, to help us understand this a little bit more, is Dr. Liia Ramachandra. Liia is a PharmD and a PhD and the CEO of Baily, which is an ethical, medically clean skincare company. And she is intricately knowledgeable from a medical perspective of how skin affects us internally and how to use skincare to directly help treat internal inflammation and combat allergy season issues. Liia has vast experience in global medical affairs, global ethics and compliance, and clinical research, and she's worked with major companies including Pfizer, Takeda, and Astellas. Welcome, Liia. We're so glad you could take time to join us today. Thank you so much. And did I get all of that right?
Yes, you did. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Liia, can you start out by explaining to our listeners exactly how climate change can affect skin health?
Yes, absolutely. So as you actually said yourself, skin is our largest organ, and many people don't understand that, but it is our largest organ. So everything you put on your skin will either get absorbed in your skin or will stay on your skin. So it will either affect you internally or externally. With climate change, and I think Dr. Aida also mentioned, there was a research done that a 2% 2 Celsius or 3.6 Fahrenheit increase in temperature can actually lead to skin cancer, which is horrible, right? And we don't think about this. So there was a review done of literature and many different articles. And because of the pollution and UV lights, air pollution, toxins that will increase with the increase in temperature, all of that can lead to cancer, right? And that's of course one of the major effects that we can see. The warmer climate, hotter summers, sometimes colder winters because of more snow, right, can lead to, again, both very negative effects. When the summer is hot and humid, we'll have much more breakouts on our skin, right? Our pores can be clogged. We'll have breakouts, more allergies that can also, more pollution. We'll lead more eczema, more asthma, all of these autoimmune conditions. Mm-hmm. And more snow, colder winters, of course, will suck out all the moisture out of our skin. So climate change, both warmer summers, colder winters, can lead to changes in our skin and will affect our skin negatively. Another thing is, of course, natural disasters that come with, as also Dr. Aida was mentioning, with the climate change can affect us and are affecting us mentally, right? It causes a lot of mental stress. And we know that when we're stressed, it always leads to more breakouts in our skin. So I would say those three things are definitely leading to our skin experiencing change because of the climate change.
And like I said, everything that comes in that we don't drink is coming into our bodies through our skin. And I have to wonder, are there any conditions that would make our skin more absorbent or pulling in more things?
Yes, absolutely. Definitely with climate change, we see the rise of a lot of autoimmune conditions, right? And autoimmune meaning, asthma, allergies, intolerance to different food groups, right? Eczema, psoriasis, acne, etc. Because of that, everything that we'll put on the skin, especially when we have skin conditions such as eczema, psoriasis, or anything, or even lesions on the skin, it will get absorbed through our skin, and it will be absorbed into our body. And some molecules, such as toxins and pollutions, are small enough to be absorbed. Some are not, but they will be absorbed through the lesions in the skin, especially if you have those conditions, autoimmune conditions that can be intensified because of the warmer climate or colder climate, right? So definitely it will either be absorbed or be sitting on your skin. And if it will be sitting on your skin or your skin will be repelling it, it will be clogging your pores. It will be leading to redness or breakouts on the skin. And especially if it's on our face, right? We always look in the mirror. Again, it causes a lot of mental health issues as well. That again kind of forms a circle of breakouts and inflammation inside and out.
Liia, is there a relationship between infectious diseases and skin health? Is there a relationship with COVID or, again, any other infectious disease and skin health?
Yes, absolutely. So we already talked about elevated pollen levels, right? So there are more patients with allergies, with asthma, with eczema flares. We also see many more patients and children with Lyme disease,
Okay, yeah.
Then you can also see, of course, there are many more ticks than there were before. So again, everywhere we go, it feels like the tick season is now much longer than it was before. So infectious diseases are definitely on the rise. And when we talk about increased temperature, humidity, we also see a lot more cases in hand, foot, and mouth diseases. So again, it's a fungi that can be on our skin, and again, it will lead to the different skin conditions. And we see this also, especially in the young children and infants, because they cannot regulate their temperature that well, or their metabolism is still yet forming. So we see eczema is also on the rise in children because of that.
So I want to talk about what ordinary people can do in their everyday lives to help drive solutions to skin health issues that are caused by climate change. What can they do? Because they can't stop the climate change all around them. And again, they can't close off the skin because that would cause even some more problems. What can we do to help drive these solutions?
Absolutely. So I would say, because if you have increasing allergies or increased sensitive skin, which I feel most of us are now at this point are, and it doesn't matter how old you are. So I would definitely say less is more. Make sure that you moisturize. That's number one with really good, high quality. Doesn't mean expensive. High quality doesn't mean expensive skincare. And make sure you always put sunscreen, even though we had recent recalls of sunscreens. Make sure you do put it on, because when you go outside, even in the winter, you still get all the UV radiation that reflects either off the snow or through the clouds, even if you don't see it. And people forget to put sunscreen in the winter. I'd say always put it the whole year around. That's the best protection you can have.
And last word before we go to, and it's not just about climate change, even though I'm sure climate change exacerbates it, but as it relates to skin health, we really have to watch what we put on the skin, like hair products, things like that. I'm learning and I'm hearing that you just really, using natural and organic products, because it's all going in. Mm-hmm. And I think it seems to be more exacerbated now than, say, maybe 20 years ago. Climate change it seems to exacerbate all these other issues.
Yes, correct, yes. And also now people tell me, well, wheat or gluten, why kind of it's not being the skincare, or why am I allergic now while my mom wasn't? And I say, well, wheat now, it's all GMO, it's all genetically modified. 20 years ago, it wasn't. So yes, of course, you still feel those allergies. So yes, I would say natural, as little as possible ingredients, and make sure it is allergen-free.
Indeed. Thank you so much. And again, those are small things, but important, and they still go back to climate change. Thank you. We have been with Dr. Liia Ramachandra with Epilinks, and she is a skincare doctor and specialist, and she has made us smarter today in terms of that relationship. Thank you so much for being with us today, Liia, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but it's our goal for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of a trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourself. And each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but they all add up, one way or the other, to the change that we each live through. Thank you so much. This is your host, Bernice Butler, and please join us again next week as we continue our conversation on air quality and transportation. Thank you.